Hey Corame, let's take a look at your week for assignment 3. I don't know why that always gives me trouble. Um, you have a very dynamic composition going on here, and I think a lot of it is due to the fact that the entire composition is a 2-point perspective rather than a 1-point perspective, which is, for me, not a huge deal, but it is giving you a slight unfair advantage amongst your peers that have the 1-point perspective being done in it for their interiors, for their kitchens. But it has this nice contrast going on between the reds, the grays, and the whites. So it feels very minimal because of the kind of simplistic color scheme, but it's such a good color scheme that you get a lot out of it, and a lot of visual interest, coming from just 3 colors. The perspective is good, I would say, overall. There are a few kind of minor areas that are problematic and break kind of the illusion just in terms of the perspective, but I would say overall looks good. The table and the doorway are moving in the same direction, and pretty much everything that's going on here is working out really well. The only spot that for me is an issue is over here, where you have what I'm assuming is like a kind of a cover that you can lift up and retracts back. Well, each of the sections to it are kind of moving completely horizontally, and I think kind of the way that this is kind of situated, it should be moving in. These lines should be moving in perspective as well. So not as huge of a deal towards the bottom, but as we kind of move upward, it should be moving more and more towards kind of at an angle. And so that's where we start to see it kind of break down a little bit. I think the thing for me is that I don't really see perspective issues anywhere in the composition other than here. So this one kind of stands out. It's also very, very white compared to everything that's around it in the immediate vicinity. So it also kind of draws attention to itself. I think in a general kind of overlook of the composition, I would say that it feels very kind of empty and bordering on unfinished, but that might be too strong of a word. But there are things that kind of stand out to me, like having a faucet, but there's no sink within kind of the cabinetry. You have a doorway, but there's nothing beyond the doorway. It's kind of this empty space. And things like that, really make the scene, it doesn't feel realistic because of that. There's just these elements, there's no kind of handles on any of these cabinets up top, and so there's just these little tiny components, sometimes not tiny because that's kind of a big area, that just throw things off a little bit. So there's kind of this mixed thing going on. Some great perspective, I would say overall. Really wonderful color usage. And I think along with the inconsistency is some great coverage here, very smooth, super even. But then the cabinetry on the top, it feels very streaky. There seems like there's a lot of movement to the color. To the marker, and I'm not sure if that's a textural thing that you're trying to get across, or if that's just the way that it was being applied, the colored pencil and the marker were being applied. But this to me feels like very uneven coverage, and for me at least, the problem is that I say to myself, well, you can make really nice areas of very, very flat coverage, but then why do we have it here? And I would assume it's a textural thing, and I think if it's a textural thing, it's just not coming across as clearly as it needs to, what the texture is, whether it's a shiny metallic, whether there's high reflectivity, whether there's an actual texture on there that I'm just not kind of getting, but it's not coming across to me as clearly as I think maybe it should. And I think there's some things like the ceiling. It'd be nice to have this, if this is kind of a drop ceiling where it kind of comes in. Not a drop ceiling, that's not the right word, but if this is kind of, inset within the ceiling, I think that needs to be made a little bit clearer. I think the lights in general, if it's kind of a track lighting thing that doesn't come across as convincing, that might need the same amount of consistency that kind of down here does in terms of overall production values and things like that. So I feel it's kind of mixed. I think in some areas it's working out really well, and has got some great stuff occurring in it texturally and in color and coverage. And I think in other areas it just feels very limited, or it just doesn't feel like it's meshing with the rest of the drawing.